As the inauguration of Donald Trump approaches on January 20, 2025, tensions with China are escalating. Trump's threat to impose tariffs exceeding 60% on Chinese imports has reignited fears of a trade war, shaking global markets. While he essentially and initially sought to ease tensions by inviting President Xi Jinping to the inauguration ceremony, his appointment of hardline advisors raises doubts about diplomatic progress. Cybersecurity breaches and reciprocal sanctions have further deepened the rift between the two nations, setting the stage for a potential sharp deterioration in US-China relations. Welcome to In Depth, where we explore this critical issue. In the wake of President Trump's trade war with China, Mexico initially benefited as companies shifted production there to avoid tariffs. The Economists reported that, as Trump's second term approaches, concerns are increasing about Chinese firms using Mexico as a tariff-free gateway to the United States market. Investment from China in Mexico has surged, especially in the electric vehicles and auto parts sectors. While some Chinese companies are assembling products in Mexico, concerns about US-China trade manipulation persist. As political pressure mounts, Mexico is taking steps to appease the United States, including plans to replace Chinese components with locally made ones. However, challenges remain in replacing critical Chinese supply chains, especially for electric vehicles, batteries, and microchips. On December 3, 2024, China imposed stringent export controls on critical minerals in response to US actions, including sanctions on Chinese companies and ship-making equipment. South China Morning Post stated that this marks a significant escalation in the United States-China trade conflict, with both countries evoking national security to justify these measures. China, already dominant in the critical mineral supply chain, aims to block dual-use materials, especially and essentially for defense and tech development. As Trump returns to office, the United States is expected to focus on securing domestic mineral production and reducing reliance on China. However, escalating tariffs and export controls may strain relationships with allies like Canada, South Korea, and Japan, complicating global supply chains. And as tensions between Washington and Beijing intensify, a new chapter in the trade war unfolds. On January 2, 2025, China escalated its retaliation, adding 28 US companies to an export control list, signaling a deepening rift that could reshape global trade and security.
Tensions between Washington and Beijing have escalated in recent months, driven by reciprocal sanctions and trade restrictions that highlight a deepening rift between the two superpowers. As President-elect Donald Trump prepares to assume office, China has responded to US actions with bold retaliatory measures. On January 2, 2025, China's Ministry of Commerce announced the addition of 28 American companies to an export control list, citing national security concerns. These new restrictions aim to limit companies' access to dual-use goods, with both civilian and military applications. This escalation follows a series of US sanctions targeting Chinese companies, particularly in the semiconductor industry. The Biden administration have previously imposed export controls on 140 Chinese firms in an effort to curb China's technological advancements and military capabilities. In a sharp response, Trump has threatened to impose tariffs of up to 60% on Chinese goods, signaling that the trade war he initiated during his first term is far from over. At the core of these tensions are U.S. accusation of Chinese cyber espionage and its support for Taiwan, a territory Beijing considers a direct challenge to its sovereignty. While some analysts predict the trade war will intensify, others express cautious optimism for potential negotiations and a new trade agreement reminiscent of deals reached prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. The global implications of these mounting tensions for trade and security are profound. As the world watches, the two superpowers continue to navigate this volatile and high-stakes landscape, leaving uncertainty about what lies ahead.
And for more analysis, we are joined by Professor Frank Mosmor, an international relations professor from Texas. And we're also joined by Professor Yinar Tanjian, a senior fellow at the Institute and a chairman of Asia Narratives from Beijing. Welcome, sir, and it's very wonderful to have you on our show today. Sir, Professor Mosmor, how do U.S. officials perceive the potential impact of Trump's proposed tariffs on the American economy and job market?
Okay, well, thanks for having me. As once said before, tariff is not really like a long-term tactical move. It's just like a small tactical move to push some other strategies ahead. United States and China, they didn't have any agreement based on trade. So most likely Donald Trump is trying to push sort of agreement, guarantee that China will respond. So he's playing with the tariff tool. But, in general, like tariff is not something that is going to be imposed for a long time. It's not going to be like a plan that he's going to play for a long time to affect the economy in the United States. We have so many agreements between us, the United States, and Europe, even Mexico and Canada, but we didn't have any agreement with China. The only one is just like for citizens living in each country, which was imposed in 1984, I think, something like that. So I don't think there is anything to worry about. It's just a matter of time, so we know what's in the future and what China could do and respond.
Sir, why don't you think there's anything to worry about in light of all that's happening and taking place?
Okay, I'm sorry, because the voice is not clear enough. What you said?
Why don't you think there's anything that you worry about in light of all the escalations that are taking place?
Well, definitely when you're trying to apply something, there is sort of like escalation. It's not going to be like a smooth, like a piece of cake. Of course, China is not going to like it. And if you look at China's policies globally, China is trying to apply whatever, suits them. And at the end, this is economical war. The United States is trying just to, control, their strategic abilities, anywhere in any zone in the world. And China is doing the same thing. China is trying to reach even South America, Middle America, and now, they are middling in Panama Canal. So it's not just the United States. So, it's a strategical interest of every country. So every country has the right to look for it and to try the right thing for him. And if we are trying to do that, China is trying to do that as well. So at the end, we'll see what kind of mutual interest that we're going to reach.
Okay, we move on to Professor Tanjian. Sir, what role do regional trade agreements, such as Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, play in strengthening China's economic resilience against U.S. sanctions?
All right. First, I would thanks for having me, but I would disagree with my colleague. I think there is plenty of reason to be concerned. And it's not so much on the Chinese side. They have prepared. Your question is about, these comprehensive economic partnerships, the Belt and Road Initiative, and how they're working for China. China's number one trade partner now is ASEAN. And its trade is moving increasingly away from the United States and also Europe. And they're willing to trade with countries that want to trade with them. And you can see no better example of that than Chanche Port, where it's now a breath of fresh air. Finally, the west coast of South America has a port where it does not have to be beholden to the U.S., especially given Donald Trump's threats to take over the Panama Canal. He doesn't seem to be aware that the Monroe Doctrine was negated, but that doesn't matter to Donald Trump. He's not about policy. He's not about ideology. He's simply about this idea that he's going to get the best deal, and he's going to try any which way he can to do that. I do think there is cause for concern, as I said earlier, because in the United States, costs are going to go up. 70%
Sir,
of
you disagree with Mr. Frank Mosmar because you think from your own perspective that China is not the main issue in this problem, or China is not the core issue of this problem at this point? And of course, Professor Mosmar can answer you back.
Well, let me finish first. Okay. All right. My issue is that 70% of the Americans believed prior to the election that they were living paycheck to paycheck, that inflation had eroded their standard of living. Right now, what Donald Trump wants to do two things. First, he wants to raise tariffs. The U.S. imports $3.8 trillion worth of goods. If it doesn't import it from China, it'll import it from somewhere else. He's also taken aim at all countries that have a trade surplus with the U.S. So it's not just China involved. So you start adding up what those tariffs will mean, and you're adding another almost $1 trillion to the pay tab of American middle-class people who feel that they can't afford that. The second thing he wants to do is he wants to devalue the dollar. He believes that the U.S. is too expensive, and that by devaluing the U.S. currency, it'll make it more competitive. The problem with that is that financially, with the huge debt that the U.S. has, that isn't going to work very well. So my concern is that this is going to affect the American people very heavily. It will definitely affect the world, but definitely more Americans than anyone else. And you'll probably see a change in his tune, at least 6 months in, when people start complaining.
Professor Mosmar, do you want to comment on Professor Tangin when he disagreed with you? Or do you want me to move on with my question?
Well, I understand what you said, but in the meantime, if I want to comment, okay, it's either comply or trying to fix. So the United States is now reaching its kind of red line in economy. Now, if we want to try to fix the economy, if we must comply or what China is doing, and we will be actually a follower of China, as China will be the dominant of the economy in the world, or we're trying to change something, we're trying to fix the situation. If we want to do that, of course, it's not magic, it's going to take some time. So if we want to start producing, manufacturing in the United States, maybe it's going to take some time, like a year or two. But, we need to go through the process. We need to push those companies to start manufacturing in the United States, which is like later on is going to, drop the prices for consumers in the United States. It's a process. It's not something that, tariff and increasing in prices, and then there is the whole prices in the United States, like, what the media is doing.
Okay, Professor Mosmar. Professor Mosmar, how could the appointment of advisors like Trump's nominee for National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz, and Secretary of State designate Marco Rubio shape U.S. foreign policy towards China? And why, sir, do you think that China is the core of the problem, not the United States and Donald Trump?
Okay, well, I hate to personalize problems. When you're talking about economy, it's not personal problem. Now, okay, about economy and fixing the economy. That we need to play with the tools, like that we must do. So number one, like let's say we want to increase taxes. We don't want to increase taxes. We don't want to push the American citizens to increase to pay extra for increasing taxes. So okay, let's try something else. Now, another tool that we could use, which is increasing product, which is what he said as an example. Mr. Trump, he said that we're going to try to do fracking and we're going to try to increase the production of gas and oil and, utilizing our resources as an example. So, like, when we are doing, when we are working with our tools as economists, we have to work with each one at itself, and we're trying to see the results and how the impact is going to be. So there is no magic in economy. When Donald Trump, as an example said, like he promised to cut the energy bill for 50% after 1 year, that's kind of true. Why? Because it takes time. If he said tomorrow, yeah, he's lying. So it takes time to apply any policy and then wait to see the results out of it. Now, when we talk in tariffs, as I told you, tariff is a tool. Tariff is not an economic a fixed economy.
Okay, sir, I'll leave it there and back to you again. Professor Tanjan, how could China's Belt and Road Initiative be leveraged to counteract the effects of United States tariffs on its economy, sir?
Well, I mean, the way you put it, leveraged, it makes it sound like this is something that China started. The fact is, the U.S. has been the aggressor.
No, sir, I did not make it anything that started.
No, but I'm just saying that the choice of words it makes it seem what China has been doing. Yeah, it's language.
Sir, we're not with China. We're not with the United States.
Right. I understand that.
We stand on a neutral ground. It's your opinion that we respect, of course, at the end of the day. But of course, it's obvious that Donald Trump is the one that started the tariffs, and it's not China. So I really want to understand the situation.
Okay, so the Belt and Road Initiative is not something that took place in the last few years. It's been 10 years, which predates Donald Trump. This was something that started off in 2012 and really started having traction in 2014. You've seen a tremendous amount of infrastructure put in all over the world. Can you imagine what would have happened had that alternative infrastructure for logistics not been in place when all of these wars that the United States has started created these bottlenecks? If there had been no viable alternatives, it would have been much worse. Now, in terms of what China is doing, they see opportunity for win-win. It's very different. In Washington,
exactly,
everything
this is what I wanted to point at. It's supposed to be a win-win situation, not a trade war, sir.
That's correct. But in Washington, they view things differently. It's a zero-sum game. Either we win or you win.
Washington or the new administration?
Well, it's both. I mean, Joe Biden did not change, although he ran against the tariffs, saying that they were hurting the average American because they were increasing prices. When he got into office, he not only did not take them away, he added more. So, I mean, it is something in Washington. There is this that America's problems, whether it's drugs, guns, death, oil prices or inflation or a lack of industrial economy, is somehow always somebody else's fault. And in this particular case, it's China's. But as I point out to you earlier, $3.8 trillion is what the U.S. has to import. And this idea that you're going to be able to replace that and that people are going to invest in the U.S., knowing full well that there will be a change in the government in 4 years and that policies could change dramatically. It doesn't make sense from an economic point of view. So this idea that, yes, I understand policies take time, but Donald Trump is not, he's not pushing policies. He's pushing short-term quick fixes, which don't add up. I mean, this whole idea that he's going to somehow change the industrial makeup of America, it hasn't worked. Biden tried to do the same thing. Where is the outpouring of industries returning to the U.S.? No one is going to want to work in a textile factory or a sneaker factory or a furniture factory, that pays the equivalent of 50 cents or $1 a day. in other countries. I don't know. In the U.S., we have minimum wage requirements. That means that it will not be competitive. So this idea that you want businessmen are going to want to build factories in the U.S. to satisfy Donald Trump's idea of winning, it doesn't make sense for them in the long term. It's too risky.
Exactly. So, Professor Musmar, how might the United States leverage its alliances with other countries to strengthen its position against China in the trade war?
Well, actually, in the economy, I agree with your various certain points, but in reality, what works nowadays with our global economy, just I don't want to distinguish China as a country and the United States as a country from the rest of the globe. The most important thing is agreement. You must have agreement with any country. China and the United States don't have any sort of agreement. So let's consider now the goodwill of what could happen. Now, every single media outlet that we were talking to, they just trying to push the idea that this idea of Donald Trump is not going to be good. Okay, I'm not with Donald Trump in that. I'm not against him with that. But we need to fix the problem. So we need to try. Now, if we try this and we reach an agreement, a trade agreement with China at a certain level, between us and them for different sort of businesses, different kind of percentages, like what we have now with Europe as an example, and different countries.
Sir, do you think that an agreement could be reached?
Sorry?
Do you think an agreement could be reached, and if Donald Trump is claiming these statements or making the statements, he's doing them for the sake of negotiating when he becomes the president of the United States in a few days?
It could be, yes, it could be. Because as I told you, once we use tariffs as economists, we use it to pressure, we use it to ask for deals. So, yes, it could be done.
Okay, Professor Tanjin, what ways can China enhance its trade relationships with emerging markets to offset losses from United States trade restrictions, although I think from my own perspective that the United States is not going to give up on China?
All right, let me correct something that my colleague is saying. He says that China and the U.S. have no trade agreements, and that's utterly false. They're both members of the WTO, and China enjoys most favored nation status. Those are both economic interests and norms. So this idea that somehow they're walking into a new era and that it's tabula rasa out there is nonsense. The fact is the U.S. is the one who is preventing the WTO from working. They refused, and this is since the Obama administration, to appoint appellate judges. And the reason that's important is you have to have at least 3 appellate judges on every case. Right now, there are 0 appellate judges. And the U.S. has a veto power on it. And they basically said, unless you appoint American jurists to this, we will not accept it. And the rest of the world says we're not going to appoint simply American jurists because you want to win more than 90% of the cases that you already win through the WTO.
Professor,
so it is the U.S.
Tanjin,
who's
can
aggressive.
I please interrupt you in this context
Sure.
and ask you a question, please? Who do you think is stronger in this context, the United States or China, when we're discussing the WTO or we're discussing, of course, the trade relation between the United States and China? Who is stronger in this relationship?
Well, I mean, in terms of manufacturing, China is stronger. It manufactures more than the next 5 countries. All right, next largest 5 countries. It manufactures more than those 5 countries. So that gives you an idea of the enormity of China. China is 30% of the world's growth. U.S. isn't even close. Right? China is very dependent on bringing resources into its country and adding value for them. Go ahead.
Yes, go ahead, sir. True, sir. I'm just confirming what you're saying.
So it is very difficult to do that. Now, the U.S. has the political controls. It has the ability to veto any nominations to the WTO. It has the ability at the P5 to veto security as security United Nations votes, as it has done with and with other matters.
Exactly, sir.
It feels that it is not bound by any treaty. I mean, Donald Trump came in, he negated the Paris Climate Accord, and this is not, the first time. Prior to his administration, the U.S. negated the Kyoto Accord. Donald Trump also walked away from the Iranian nuclear deal. He does not believe that the U.S. is bound by anything. And here's the rub. My colleague talks about, oh, well, maybe there could be an agreement. You cannot do business or have an agreement with somebody you don't trust.
Exactly.
Because the idea is you reach a common ground, but if I don't think you're going to stick to your agreement, how on earth, I don't even know how I could get there. I'm a lawyer. I was an investment banker. I was in politics. In all of those instances, if you can't trust the guy, you can't do a deal with him. And Donald Trump has proven time and time again, he's not a person who can be trusted.
Thank you very much, Professor Inar Tanjan, Senior Fellow, Tahi Institute and Chairman of Asia Narratives. Thank you very much, Professor Frank Mosmar, an International Relations Professor. And we thank you very much for your insights and valuable knowledge. Thank you for joining us in today's episode of In Depth. That brings us to the end of our episode. And thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.